My guest for this episode is Dr. Gina Jerkins. She is the founding executive director of the Houston Equity Fund, whose mission is to accelerate transformative change for small businesses and nonprofits here in my hometown city of Houston. It really is about getting underrepresented and under-resourced communities what they need to transform, expand, and better serve their communities. Of course, I am a small business owner, so I was aware of the work of the Houston Equity Fund before I met Dr. Gina. But when I did meet her through a mentor of mine, I was openly seeking connection to other local women business owners here in town. And I don't know about you, but Dr. Gina is the type of person that takes some space. And as a Black woman, I appreciate every ounce of that. And I applaud it. I'm one of those you go girls all the time that I meet these types of special people. So naturally, because I know she is a person that does not gatekeep, she is always about sharing knowledge and resources. Of course, I wanted her to be a guest on this podcast. So I wanted her to share wisdom with you because she basically was the one that helped me be, a little bit bolder about moving into this next phase of my business life. She is a leader of the Houston Equity Fund, but she is not the only part of it. They also have a lot of resources that she is going to explain in this podcast. So listen up. My hope is that any of you that have the desire to start a business, midlife or beyond, that you'll pick up some nuggets from this episode that'll inspire you to take that first step. Oh, welcome, Dr. Gina. I am so happy that you are here to talk to us midlifers. I got a lot of questions, and hopefully you have a ton of wisdom that you're just going to spill out for all of us to learn from. So thank you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'll share what I have. I don't know if it's some wisdom, some perspective, some opinions, and then lots of questions. And questions are actually good. Questions are what we reflect and figure out whatever is whatever. So yes, thank you for having me today.
You got a lot to share. We're still kind of relatively new acquaintances, and I wanted to share with everyone how we connected because you are doing a lot of work with uplifting just people in general, but you specifically with Black women. And so I was at a pivot in my own life, career and other things. And a mutual friend said, you need to talk to Dr. Gina. She's doing some work, connecting some folks and trying to, let them see all the different ways that they could shine. And so when we had that initial phone call, and that wasn't a very long time ago. This was just a few months ago. Yes. I was really trying to just have the courage to do some things that I knew I wanted to do. And so you invited me to a space where the Houston Equity Fund was bringing people together for different ways. And you shared that you were a former educator. And I was like, oh, okay, check. We can connect on that. And you make transition from education into the work that you're doing now. So I kind of want you to share a little bit about that journey of your own. There's a culture in K-12 education that is different from the rest of what other folks are doing. So what was that journey like for you? Because I'm sure that was a big pivot.
Yes. So in general, then, just so that I can make sure I'm speaking to what you desire to just hear more about, it is the transition from being an active in active engagement as an educator in the K through 12 space and where I am now. And so what I will say is that there were stops along the way and pauses along the way. And honestly, I think in many ways, I still educate and I empower. So the context that allows me to speak more accurately to it is to understand that there's a piece of me that always knew that the world positions things often as either or. And they hold very little space for both and a continuum. But even when I think about just my work as Dr. Gina Lynn and that whole nomenclature, get the word out, right? The logo is a cowboy boot and a stiletto. And it captures from an early age this realization that I am from a small country town where I have a pickup truck and I wear cowboy boots and doing much of my work in the city, it's stilettos and it's a whole nother persona, and I am both. And I refuse to allow the world to force me to choose an either or paradigm. And so then fast forward full circle back to your question, I always wanted to be an educator. I can remember being outside under the trees, lining up my siblings and forcing them to be my students. I always wanted to be an educator, but I always wanted to have a nonprofit, and I always wanted to serve in ministry, and I always wanted to do TED Talks and whatever else. I would say always, meaning there are other things. And I'm just a firm believer that I don't have to exist in the paradigm of either or. So with that being, with a very clear awareness of who I believe I am as an educator and as an empowerment enthusiast, I just see shifting as a different expression. Like shifting to this work is just a different expression of doing what I'm clear that I'm called to do. And I think that's much of it, Akila, is just refusing to allow the world to put you in that box. And so the shift was sitting in a principal's office at a very pivotal point in my school's journey. We were opening a new campus. That is an aspirational aim of many educators, to get your own school, to get your own campus, to pick out everything, to do all of that. And I just remember, make it your own. And I remember sitting in my current school at that time, looking out of the window and saying, I'm done. I'm complete. And I think that then addresses two major things. For others, it was, you're where many of us desire to be, and you're getting the next in that. And for me to be okay and clear with, while that may have been the aspirational goal for others, it didn't have to be the aspirational goal for myself. And the other part of it is, I will have to highlight, things were good. I loved my kids. I still do. My staff. This idea then that I had to push back against in my own mind was that something had to be wrong for me to make a shift. And that's a whole other paradigm. So I'll pause there.
Yes. Oh, we could go down that rabbit hole. We really could. I relate. So I'm appreciating you saying that. Thanks for that.
Yes. And so it was just that, Akila, it was doing the work in my own head. It was embracing my own philosophical thrust in life. Again, just highlighting, I don't have to exist in an either or world. If I've wanted to work as an educator and as a principal particularly, got certifications, of course, with superintendency, all of those things, and determined that's not what I want to do with my next. And it's okay that that's a goal that somebody else has, but that's not mine. I've always wanted to work in full-time ministry. So actually, I shifted from serving in ministry at a public school to serving in ministry full-time at a church, to serving in ministry full-time as a nonprofit organization, to doing the work that I do now as a consultant, and in some ways dabbling in all of it still, and creating the space to do so. But the greatest shift was realizing that many midlifers think, attainment is having the legacy of, I worked 30 years at a place, I got the parking spot, the t-shirt, and the watch. That don't move me. I mean, I can paint my own name on a parking spot. That was not my goal. And being okay with really, that's the bigger thing, being okay with determining what's the goal for me, what makes me feel fulfilled. And pushing back hurdles, people saying, oh, you're indecisive, or you're flaky, or you haven't figured out what you want to do at this stage. I'm none of those things. I just choose repeatedly in a different space. I'm not flaky. I'm very much a planner. I'm very much deliberate. I'm very much clear about how many years I may or may not do a particular role. But that's not being flaky. That's being free. No. Free to be different expressions of myself. So I'll pause. I don't know. Yeah.
No. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm nodding. I probably look like a bobblehead because everything you're saying, I totally relate to it, because like you said, when number one, the first point that I resonated with is where you said that nothing had to be wrong for me to want to make a shift. You were very fulfilled, you were very accomplished, but you just decided, okay, there are some other things in addition to this that I want to do, some other paths that I may want to experience. And that was something that I think was the eye-opener when I also left education, which I say I left my education job. That's probably a better way to describe it. But everything that I do now, even with adults, it's very much teaching and coaching and guiding them and hopefully connecting them to the resources that are, going to take them to their next level. But there sometimes is this, I guess, shame of leaving education, that you somehow have turned your back on the good work.
Yes.
And you're like, well, because for me, my point was 23 years. At 23 years, I was okay. I was like, okay, I've done everything that I want to do here. And it was, there were some reactions to that. It was like, well, you're leaving all this behind. Well, aren't you working towards, like you said, the superintendency, the this, the that, and you get all the certifications. You do what is the good, checklist. The good girl is supposed to follow all the rules. And then you're like, okay, I don't know. I want to try some other things. So that conversation with other educator friends now, there is a switch mindset that has to happen in order for you to say it's okay for me to have other aspirations. And especially after having a full career in education. I mean, 23 years, like you say.
You did really good.
I got all of it.
I've way been years compared to what you got. You're a legend in my book, because honey, the way I move and shift, I'm like, And I think it is that. I think, like, when I hear you speak to it, it is the narratives, like when you say the rules, and then there's just this piece of me that says, but who made the rules? Who says that's the rules? And those are the things, like, greater than making the shift is the actual shift. It's the noise in our own head. And whether we're speaking education or just anything, I think it's so easy to adopt societies or cultural or faith rules without really exploring, but who made those rules and who says so? And then literally, sincerely, if that is somebody's aspirational goal, to even play by the quote unquote rules or attain the end result that society says is the desired end result, I don't make that wrong. I just acknowledge that it doesn't work for me. Hats off to the teachers who are now teaching my great nieces or whatever, like, hats off that you stayed 60 years. You probably may not need to, because you don't even really know what them children over there talking about. They got a whole different vocabulary. But I'm just saying, hats off to you. I'm not going to make that wrong, but I'm not going to allow myself to feel guilted into making that my rule. And then it is what you're saying as well, Akila. It's just changing the language around it. You didn't leave education. I don't feel that I left education at all. You've attended lunch and lifts and different things that we've done. It's very educational. I just choose to educate in a different role, in a different capacity. I will always be an educator. I am an educator. I will always be an empowerment enthusiast. I was empowering middle schoolers, and now I'm empowering under-resourced, historically marginalized communities. Like, I know who I am, and maybe that's a piece of it too. In the struggle of midlife, is that some people are still in the space of figuring out who they are, and that's okay too. Yeah, that's okay too, to be there, because many of us grew up in an era when people didn't ask you nor encourage you to be reflective about who you are versus what you do. And so many of us lead with what we do as a profession, or what we do, our titles, whatever that is. And so it's harder for us to shift because we don't know who we are. And so our identity is so engrafted into what we do that shifting can be particularly difficult. And so, yeah, I got clear on a lot of that stuff years ago. And so I don't know, I can almost guarantee you I'll be doing something drastically different in just a minute, right? And it will still be, though, I will be very clear that in that role, though, I am an educator and I'm an empowerment enthusiast. I'm a wellness whisperer, like the horse whisper, dog whisper, whatever they call them, people that got that special touch. And those are my jams. And I can do that in any role. And that's, yes. So a lot of it is that.
I want to get into that, because with the work that you're doing now, I mean, get a little more detailed with it, because with the Houston Equity Fund, of course, you know, you mentioned that was Well, I won't say that that was my introduction to the work. It was actually, some of the grant opportunities last year, I believe, when as a family, we just kind of huddled together and started exploring some business ideas. And what the Houston Equity Fund, the resources that they were putting out was part of, us educating ourselves. So when I started attending the luncheon lifts and learning about your work specifically, I was intrigued. So I'm just like, okay, I see this work going on with the women leaders and other ways that we're kind of connecting people to other folks in the right spaces. What all is that with the Houston Equity Fund, and how are you seeing the work that you're doing with these people? Like you said, the uplifting, the empowering. How does your personal mission align with the work that the Houston Equity Fund is doing for the community?
Yes, I think by God's grace. So I've said this, and I don't know how much faith stuff you want in here, but y'all pretty much attended. So y'all come at some point, I'm gonna say, right? I'm gonna say something about Jesus and all that good stuff, right? So for years, honestly, I've confessed over my life that I will be paid to do what I am made to do. And I say I have a scriptural context for that. I've talked about that several times, where Moses' mom was literally paid to nurse him. And so same God is what I believe. And so with that being said, that gives context for this response to the Houston Equity Fund. So I'm not just the executive director, I'm the founding executive director. I'm literally the only director that the org has ever had. And so then much of what is in the very fabric of the organization is reflective of the personal priorities that I have, the spaces that I feel called to lead. And so with that being said, almost anything that you see incorporated, for example, I know that I'm an educator. Every grant that we give has an education component. You will not get a check without going to education. Everything that we do around Lift, thus the name of the segment. It's called the Lift on the radio. Our particularly our women gatherings for under-resourced community of color women who are small business owners, nonprofit leaders, is called Lunch and Lift. All of those, the lift is the piece that's associated with the empowerment thrust that I have in my life. So I'm very blessed. I'm very blessed to have the opportunity to lay out the infrastructure of an organization that pretty much mirrors who I believe that God created me to do. And then the icing on the cake is then to have plenty of money to do it with. So yes, all intertwined, and everything about the Houston Fund for Education is this imprint of the wiring that God has on the inside of me. And I think for his purpose, I really believe that education, access to education really is power. Knowledge really is power. The amount of things that we don't know and don't have access to is, it's just incredible when I'm sitting on the other side of it to see like, man, we just didn't know. And what I'm clear about is at some point with grants, the checks are finite. There's only a certain measure of money to give out. And when that's spent, it's spent. But knowledge, I mean, that has infinity opportunity, because what you know and then what you can learn because of what you know, and what like that has multiplication and so I'm excited about that. And then the empowerment piece, of course, through the lifts is the opportunity to try to speak to the whole person. Like I have a whole thrust that's about wellness and therapeutic work and psychological and mental wellness as a licensed counselor. And so I'm going to work that piece in, because to talk to me about business without checking in to see if I'm well, checking in to see if I'm mentally present. Like yes. there's just like, we can't limp in every area. And while we may have to work a moment to garner up enough finances and whatever to have our businesses be at the levels that we desire them to be on a success matrix, we can move forward in the work of mental wellness and just emotional wellness and emotional intelligence and those things. So yeah, the work through HEF allows me to put my imprint in the very fiber of the organization.
Now, speaking of the luncheon lifts, and that, of course, is where I have made a lot of, number one, I come out of there always feeling uplifted. So that term lift, I know it's intentional for your work, but that is the feeling that I have when I walk out of those events. is I feel a little bit more courage, a little bit more clarity to keep doing whatever that next tiny step is. And I will say that, at least for me, even this, I mean, this venture right here, we're talking on a brand new podcast that was just kind of a dream or a really weird idea that came up with and decided, okay, you know what? I'm going to stop talking about it and I'm going to do it.
Yes.
Going back to that person that I was, a few months ago, just thinking about all of this, as somebody that was in midlife, I'm constantly having to have that argument in my head of, is it too late? Is it okay? Is this something that I should be doing once I'm past 50? Because, it's all these different stories where we talk ourselves out of the big thing, because at the root of it, we're scared.
Yeah.
Where we don't know, what it's going to be on the other side. We don't know. We're caring about what other people are going to say. So when I go to those lifts, those lunch and lift engagements, I look around the room and I see a whole lot of women that are my age or even more mature. And that alone is inspiring for me when I hear somebody that, I'm always asking, how old are you? Not because I'm looking at what they look like, but I'm truly asking, okay, you're 60 and you just started this 2 years ago, or you're 55 and you're thinking of doing something in 2 years. That's a big deal for someone like me who, I'm kind of starting over at this point in my life. So was that intentional to bring in people, that are at midlife, or did the community just kind of grow organically? Because I'm curious, how did all of these midlifers decide to, just come together and start doing the thing?
Right. I think it's interesting because I will have people in early stages of their journey, late 20s, early 30s, who will ask that similar question, like, how did you find all of us? And so I think it's similar, honestly, Akila, to like when you're interested in a certain car, do you notice that you see that car everywhere when you're, and so I think it's that. I think each person walks into the space and they see what they're looking for. I'll have older, like more seasoned women, as you say, ask me like, how'd you find all of us? I didn't. So I have to be honest and just say that. And what's beautiful about it is the desire to feel visible, to be heard, to have community. It's universal, regardless of where you are in the continuum of stages and ages. But what happens in this space is that most often people see and find what they're looking for. And so you will see those people will resonate for you because that's what you're looking for. And then I'll have younger people who are like, man, I thought I was crazy and the only one who wanted to bet on myself. And then I came to the space and I saw other young women there too who are betting on the space. And then I have the older, more seasoned women who are like, man, I didn't think. And then I got there and I see us everywhere. And it's really not. It's a collective, universal feeling that we've reached community. And that was the goal. The goal was simply, according to the data, as you know, we shared most often every time, it speaks to how under-resourced women are, and particularly women of color. And then in that subcategory, particularly African-American women. But we have Asian women. We have, if you were there last month, you heard me whisper to my guest when she kept saying Black women. I was like, we got some other ones here too. They welcome, right? And I just kind of joked about it, but in her space where she is in Dallas and she's the lead on golf. And so in her world, there are not a lot of her. And so to my point and to your example, she saw Black women because that's what she's looking for, because in her world that doesn't exist. And so I think it's just that the idea was to create community where the data shows that women in a whole piece of pie of 100%, we get about 30. We need our space. And in there, all of these amazing things began to happen. And we transitioned from about 8 people 6 months ago to, as you know, people getting in line an hour in advance. We're having to cut off seats. Cut off the list and find bigger spaces each month because it keeps growing. I think it just speaks to the need to be visible, to be seen, to be heard, to be encouraged, to know that you're not the only person trying to reinvent, recreate, bet on yourself, do your thing. And that's it. It just happens to have a sprinkle of midlifers in there.
Okay, so tell me about that. I want you to speak directly to those people that are at that seasoned age. I have all kind of creative words to describe where I am at an age in my life, but speak directly to those people that have kind of delayed that dream of entrepreneurship. What words of encouragement or what can you say to them to just bring them on into the fold? What message do you want to relay to those folks that are midlifers like me and they're scared? They see this as a goal, but there's something holding them back.
Right. What would I say? I think I would just toggle off of the word that you're saying. And you said many of them are just scared. And that is the truth. Many people who reside in the space of comfortability, familiarity, just kind of knowing their routines, when they begin to shift and to think about doing something different, they're really afraid. And so then I say that fear can be your hurdle, or fear can be your motivator. Because the reality, Akila, for me, is that I was afraid too. But my fear was not about stepping out. I had a greater fear of having existed but not lived. I had a greater fear of getting to the end of my life and having more regrets than accomplishments. I had a greater fear of not leaving my impact in the world. And so fear was still there. But what I was afraid of was different. And perhaps that's the mature narrative that many of us have to sit with, instead of trying to talk ourselves out of being afraid of different, of coming out of comfortability, of coming out of familiarity. It's having a very reflective conversation with yourself about fear and saying, yes, I really am. I'm afraid of having to go into my savings to launch this. I'm afraid that I have to start at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm afraid that I don't have the skill sets. That's real. But I'm also afraid that I will get to the end of my life and never have done the things that I felt like I was called to do. I'm afraid that I'm going to keep waking up at night thinking about these things that won't let me go. I'm afraid that my audience of people who care about me will eventually get sick of hearing me talk about what I plan to do, but I never get around to do it. I'm afraid that I'm going to live in hypocrisy. And while I challenge my children or my spouse or my loved ones to pursue their dreams, I sit over here and I don't pursue mine. I had to lean into which fear is going to have the greatest impact on my life, the one that holds me back or the one that really pushes me to step out of my comfort zone. And so this is it. If I fail, if I never make it to speak at particular arenas, I'm telling you what, I won't have anything to hang my head down about, because I will have given it my best. I will have tried. I will one day sit at the end, space of my life and look back and said, I impacted some folk. I did the thing, right? And that fear, that motivation, leaning into fear that way was much more useful. And so to any midlifer, I wish that I could say, in church lingo or whatever, like turn around 3 times and the fear gonna be gone. Like, come over here, let me put some oil on your head and shake you up and fear. Man, fear is fear. But you can choose. You can choose to get a different narrative about fear. You can sit in fear and really process fear and the different roles that it can have in your life. And I feared that when my beloved little people in my life needed somebody to look up to and aspire and ask questions about, I wouldn't have anything to give them, because the very stuff that I'm trying to tell them to do, I didn't do it myself. I wanted something different. And so, be afraid, sit with fear, process fear, and then figure out if fear is going to be your barrier or if fear will be your motivator. And only you can choose.
I felt that because I had a moment, and it was actually at the very start of this year. It was New Year's Eve, and me and the hubby were meeting some friends for dinner. It was very low-key celebration. Some friends had come in from out of town, and they were going out to have a big night, to do all the typical New Year's Eve stuff. And we met them for dinner. really early at that senior citizen hour and said, hey, go have fun. We're going home. But I remembered looking at the start of 2024, and it was that wave of emotions that you just described, of looking back on another year and saying, what did I do? What risk did I avoid? What safe choice did I make when I really wanted to try the riskier thing? And I won't say it was a low point, but it was very sobering because, yeah. And I'm like, I'm not going to sit here at this point next year having these same thoughts. I want to feel like, okay, I did the things, some worked out, some didn't, and be able to, have some pride that, hey, I did it. I took a bet on myself, whether it worked out or not. And the other thing, you said something about what other people are going to say. And I want to harp on that just a minute, because we do sometimes at this point in life, we're worried about what everybody is going to think if I do that thing. If I completely shift and decide I want to, be a professional skydiver, I'm just making
right.
Yeah. What are they going to think? What are they going to say about me?
Right.
So we create this lane that is self-imposed because we're afraid of what somebody else is going to think. And I know my message that I want to put out there to folks is that there's very few people that are really watching you. They keep score, but they got their own lives. They got their own problems. And we're so worried about what they are going to think. And my love language to them is that whoever the they is,
right,
they got their own stuff they're dealing with.
Right. Yes. I mean,
you go shape your own story, tell that narrative the way you want it to be told. And it's just, it's just a reminder that, like you said, the fear doesn't go away. And everything that I'm doing, all the things that are on my to-do list, I told a good girlfriend of mine, I said, every time you see me step out, every time you see me do something that is a little bit out of the norm of what you imagine me doing, just understand I'm doing it terrified. Yeah, I might be smart,
but I'm doing it.
Everything might be like, lighting, environment might look polished. I said, I'm doing it terrified. And I've just accepted that that's how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for me to get there. So yes. I truly appreciate you pointing that out. But, once we get to that point, once people have made that decision to step out, to pivot just a little bit, with the work that you do, there's resources available that we can point them to. There's a community like you're building with the Houston Equity Fund that they would be welcomed into. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that.
Sure. I want to speak to that, particularly because I think community is everything. We're creating an ecosystem of community that is bigger than the grant dollar. When that's over, that is what it is. But one of our grantees is actually, that's my hard stop, is actually opening a brick and mortar today. And I'm just honored when I'm watching their stories unfold, and they're carrying products from other grantees within their stores. And so when this grant is done, there's a ecosystem of community that will help us to be more sustainable and to have longevity, and to push back and pull down against narratives regarding competition versus collaboration. Like, we're up to a much more meaningful work. So yes, with the Houston Equity Fund, as it relates to logistical pieces, people can go on the website, www.houstonequityfund.org, to find out about like grant opportunities. One is about to open even on this week, March the 12th. About $3 million in grants, and they're for real grants. And y'all know I talk about all that, and they can read about all of that. But what they can't read about is what's happening that's beyond the grant, where people see each other in the lunch and lifts, and they remember what you said, and they follow up, and they exchange names, and they exchange numbers. And so what we are constructing is an ecosystem of visibility, an ecosystem of you matter. What you're dreaming about is valuable. If I have some resources, I'll share it. We've had opportunities when a person may say, man, I got a whole list of grants. I'll send it out to everybody here. And it is this undercurrent that pushes back against what society would teach us, that narrative about how we have to move and how we have to compete, and how if you have a podcast and I have a podcast, I couldn't dare come and be on your podcast, because then that takes away from that whole poverty and scarcity mentality. Like, we're going after that with intentionality, while chunking in a measure of like ownership and responsibility and shifting. You probably heard my speech last month when I was like, we don't send out individual emails. So before you reach out to the team and say somebody did not send you something, reflect and say, did I read? Did I really go back and check? And so we're going after mindsets and just ways of being that if you really want to shift to the next, there's a measure of ownership that comes with that. There's a measure of responsibility. There's a measure of readers or leaders. I actually have to slow down and read and learn and grow and not want everything. So there's just all types of dynamics that are interwoven into the experiences that you can have. And I'll say, whether it's the Houston Equity Fund or any other collaborative organization where you really desire to go to your next. So much to say about that. Particularly though for your audience, for midlifers and just melanated at that, I think it's with that aspect is a very, it's not lost on me, the cultural nuances of the melanated midlifers, because much of the knowledge and the frameworks that we receive from those gone before us who worked so hard, and I give a nod to them, who worked so hard so that we could build on their shoulders. A lot of their value sets lock us, though, into a certain mindset. Like, because they had to work so hard to like get a chance at a job, then they often transition to the future generations. When you get that job, you better keep it. And so we have a cultural narrative about stability versus instability, versus freedom to explore and figure it out. And so to those of us who fit that range, there is this work that we have to do in our mindsets to shift into existing in a world that no longer rewards you because you do something for 30 years. If you're unhappy, why? Like, you don't have to live that narrative. So even as you were speaking, Akila, I think it's critical, if I could encourage your listeners to examine that, it really is to examine the narratives that you've bought into. And those narratives were taught to you by a generation that had a different experience than what we have. And I'm not minimizing nor dishonoring their experience. My mom and dad, coming from what they came from in the early stages of desegregation and all of those things, to buy a house in a certain community and keep it, that was a goal. Then you have a whole generation of us who have that same goal, and we don't even want no big old house like that. And we don't even want to live and have this big old land and yard. But we're so locked into the narrative versus the mindset, the lessons. The lessons are on your own, but you don't have to, it doesn't have to look like what it looks like in a different day. The mindset is choose for yourself, but you don't have to choose what they chose. Just have the mindset of choosing. We're locked into results as midlifers. Oftentimes we're locked into results, and that only intensifies the fear and the apprehension. When people ask me now, which is supposed to be this midlife like question, like if somebody says, so what are you doing? Right? I'm supposed to be able to say, oh, well, I've been being a, nonprofit leader for the past 20 years and I'm getting ready to retire. I chose to recreate that narrative, that response. I'm not answering you in results. If you ask me, what am I doing? I'm out here being brave, trying new things. I don't have to live within those rules. And we get to choose how. And that may be uncomfortable for people, and they may not know how to respond next in the conversation when you answer that. But yeah, like, you get to change, you get to choose. So I don't answer that in roles. When people say, what are you doing with HEF? I seldom talk about it. I rarely say I'm the founding executive director. Oh, I'm out here educating and empowering communities. That's what I'm out here doing. You don't get to regulate my identity and my fulfillment to the rules and the roles that make you comfortable. And so when midlifers really examine that stuff and how we move in this earth, man, we would be less afraid. You would be afraid of starting a podcast if your narrative is, I have to give a response about the podcast based on the success of the podcast. Like, did it run for several years, or did it touch a certain audience, or did it get a certain number of listeners? Those are all result responses. And that can be fearful. That packs weight. But the reality is, if you change the narrative, and the only thing about the podcast is that I dare to live out a dream that I already had, that I've always had, then you're already successful. And if I stop next month, then you know what? I started a podcast because it had been in my mind for years. When you ask me what I'm doing, it's not even about the podcast. It's about daring to put effort into something that I dreamed about. I dreamed about a podcast. That's why people honestly stay with stuff they no longer like, because it's about the results versus it's about the journey. Like, I started it. Honey, I got over there. I didn't even like that podcast stuff, but I betted on myself and I did it. And then I had the courage to reflect and figure out it's not what I really wanted to do. And now I'm off to dreaming about something else. And you can call me flaky. You can say whatever you want to say. If you ask me what I'm doing, I'm exploring my dreams and my interests, playing with it for a while to see if it's my jam. And if it's not, I'm being free enough to let it go. I'm not talking to you in your matrix. I'm not telling you how long it ran. I'm not telling you how many people were listening. I'm talking to you about the courage that it took to bet on myself and to do the thing that's in my heart to do. And that's it. And so we really can, Akila, we can live in a different set of rules and regulations and matrix and walk by our own drumbeat and do the thing and find ourselves in this stage of life having the most fulfilling lives we've ever had, because we're just refusing to be relegated to the rules and the roles that other people say we should exist within. That's...
And I got emotional. I held it in, but everything that you just said, it was almost like, when you have people that are these great singers and they go riffing off on these, you just like, oh, keep going, keep going. And the song should have ended 20 minutes ago, but you still want them to keep. That's where I was. I was like, that is what I want to, be able to share with folks, is that you get to decide what is next for you. And I just very publicly, and this is just me wanting to do this for you, is that I want to make sure you get your flowers, because I am watching on the sidelines what you're doing, and just congratulations. I mean,
thank you.
This is some bold work. We're doing the thing, and Black woman to Black woman, I see you and I am cheering for you. I really hope whatever the next thing is that gets your attention, that is attached to your dreams, that you get to fulfill it. So I am very grateful that our paths crossed. And I know that you've got a new radio show that is out now. So where can people tune in to listen to you even further?
Yes, on Amazing. Thank you for that. And thank you. Accolades back to you as well. Like this, I know it took a bump, right? Because when I met you, there was no podcast, right? So amazing that you would just bet on yourself, get started, do it, see what it does. But then I will still encourage you to say, and don't measure your success by whatever the podcast becomes. Know that you're already successful because you betted on yourself and you tried. And that's it. And it makes next less fearful.
Yes.
When it's not anchored to results. And there will be people in their conversations who will continue to try to circle you back to that. Like, how's it going? And how many people did you get? And how many people were listening? And how long do you think it's going to run? And you get to choose to either go down that rabbit hole and anchor your success to things that are beyond your control, or you can choose to anchor your success to your effort. And so when you respond, instead of speaking to results, you get to say, I got up another day and I did it when I was doubting. I got up another day and I did it when I didn't feel well. I got up another day and I spoke in transparency about whatever the topic was. I got up another day and I shared a bit of my soul. All of those things are the things that you can control, that deal only with your effort, with your journey, and not your results. How many people listen? I don't know, but at least one, because I was listening to what I was talking about and I found it meaningful. It caused me to reflect. It caused me to stand in truth. It caused me to get over another fear and another hurdle, right? Like you get to reassign that. So kudos to you for doing that. And may each of us continue to stand in that space. Happy Women's History Month. May we all make our own history in what we're up to. Now, all the way back to your question, we do the lift on Amazing 102. That's the educator in me. You know how we do all that with the kids and come all the way back to what we was really talking about, right? So the lift is on Amazing 102.5 FM, and that airs every Monday from 11 to 12. So there'll be an episode this upcoming Monday, but then they also stream them on their social media platforms. So again, that's Amazing 102.5 FM. And then we do other little, I shouldn't say little, we do other segments with other stations, sometimes like TSU and just different campuses, getting the word out, wanting our communities to find out about these things at younger ages. So as we say, they can go further faster. That's the aim. They can go further faster. And so we do a lot of that in my own personal world, just because I just have to manage it. I have a mentorship cohort, and I keep it small because they get a lot of me. The lunch and lift, as you know, is huge, but I take about 12 to 14 women to really pour into them. So I was honored to have some of them be able to come to just different things to be exposed. Someone did that for me. They escorted me in to just worlds that I didn't even know honestly existed. So I do a mentorship. I get a lot of women who are like, I need you to mentor me. Time does not permit me to do that like one-on-one, but I do it in an intimate setting. And yeah, it's such good work. Who they will be by December 31st, 2024 is already in the progress of being very different from who they were in January when they came to me. So February. So I have that going on. And then I also just launched Urgent, and that is just a response to younger women. It's for ages 18 to about 25, 30. And it's literally a space. It's called Urgent. And then the research and the statistics about the number of young people between that age who have these mental pressures and psychological pressures and need safe spaces to really figure out next for them. That's a passion point for mine. And that's great work, because research also shows that population is also most prone to do something detrimental and permanent in their lives. Many of us can hit anxiety or panic or depression, and we're just not from the age and stage where suicide was our first option or thought. And that's not to say that midlifers don't go there, but younger adults are more prone, according to the research and statistics, to actually choose that without really processing the finality of that choice. And so Urgent is a safe space for them, and it's a community where people can engage virtually. And this is what's incredible. I'm grateful to God. It's a refundable $12 a month fee. $12 fee, not a month, because I haven't decided if I'm gonna do it every month yet. But it's a refundable $12 fee, meaning basically I'm making you be slightly accountable by paying $12 to just hold your seat, so that maybe you will come up, and it's at that price so that if college students don't have parents or people who have them in a budget for wellness, they can afford $12 a month. And so that's the idea, is like, here's this space. Adults can enroll their children in it or enroll other youth that they care about, young adults in it. And that'll be intimate as well, but it'll give me a moment to hopefully give them lessons, give them insights, give them a perspective that just helps them at an early age. That too is just a passion, like go further, faster, and let me be a safe space. So those are two things. And if people want to learn more about them or engage in them, they can find them on my website, and that's www.drgenalyn, DRGENALYN.com. Very simple, very quick. Just here to help.
And just, I think back to the story that you said, as an educator and all the other things that you wanted to do. We see in your example all the different ventures that bloomed from you making that decision to pivot. So I'm grateful for you having that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Akila. I appreciate it. And we all have the power to do it. And everything you give me, I'm boomeranging back. But we all, and this is what I'll share, and I'll wrap up, because I say this to people all the time. I know that I'm special to God, but I'm not, right? I don't want people to exist in my space feeling like there's something extra special and extraordinary. Like, we all have it. You have it. I have it. And each of us just have to choose to walk in it. And when I think from a faith perspective, like when God made the sun, and we too are created by him, when he made the sun can give heat. The sun can be a light. The sun can produce energy. The sun can help plants grow. And it's still the sun. It's just different expressions of itself. When he made water, right? The water can be a wave. The water can be rain. The water can be fog. The water can be precipitation. We're all his creations. And so you and I are created to be able to pivot and to exhibit different explorations of ourselves. Why would he create all other components of his creation story to have these multiple variables? But when it comes to you and I, we have to live stuck. That's a man-made philosophical space that we have bought into. And so be encouraged. Like, you don't have to be locked here. This is an exploration of utilizing your innate calling to educate and to empower in a podcast format. But a podcast is not who you are. This is just so we all have the power to pivot. So yes, I'm an educator who did principal role in teaching and assistance and adjunct professor. I'm an educator and empowerment enthusiast and wellness person who I'm involved into, who did ministry, who does nonprofit work, who does consulting, who will, when I get a moment, do more with a private practice as a therapist. But even in that role, I see myself educating and empowering people to be well, right? With a more streamlined focus as a therapist. But I'm just existing in different expressions of who I am. And I'm not done. I mean, I don't know what I'm gonna do next. But once I became free about that, Gina, you are called, you are built to educate, to empower, and to somehow facilitate wellness. And whatever open doors that come my way that allow me to do that, as long as I get to walk in that space of who I am, the roles are just roles. And I can pivot, and you can too. That's all it is. Yeah.
Ooh, I appreciate that message, Dr. Gina. I appreciate you being here. You can open invitation anytime you want to come back.
Thank you.
Put that on the calendar, mark it, say, I'm coming back, and we're going to talk some more. We'll chop it up any kind of way you want.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Here.
Thank you.
And I truly hope that we have a lot of folks that will take advantage of the resources that
Yes, absolutely.